Speaking on the Liverpool area, what sorts of changes have you seen there while you were the member for Werriwa?
I've represented Liverpool for 25 years now. When I first became the member, work on the high schools had just stopped. Now, I think that has a couple of lessons for us. The first is how much fluctuations in government policies can in fact affect a district or a whole generation. The fact that for a couple of years the work on the boys' and the girls' high schools at Liverpool was stopped meant that a couple of years of young men and women were denied opportunities which they could never recover. The other thing is that schools are merely one of the things which we all now recognise have to be provided in any community. And of course, the big things that need to be done in Liverpool are not only schools these days, but a technical education system, if you've got that, and tertiary of other sorts, like colleges, advanced education and university. Now, that's really not available in Liverpool yet. And of course, the hospital isn't yet as advanced as it should be, nor are all the public transport facilities as advanced as they should be.
Well, you spoke about the CAEs. We do have one in Milpera. But,
yes, it's a few miles away from Liverpool, of course. It's, as we realised, of course, only a month ago, Liverpool can be cut off from Milpera College by floods.
It becomes very difficult for any of the students to have access to the college.
It's quite wrong that teenagers and people in the early 20s who live in Liverpool have to travel so far to teachers' colleges or universities. Now, sure, Milpera has improved the position, but governments have been responsible for the siting of universities and of colleges of advanced education. There wouldn't be any universities or colleges of advanced education in Australia but for governments. And governments, of course, have built those things in the centre of the city or on the other side of the city, such as Kensington, or on the north-western side, such as Ryde and so on, for Macquarie. It's not sufficiently realised, and before my government was elected at the end of 1972, that the whole movement of population has gone to the west and the southwest of Sydney.
Campbelltown is becoming the big...
Yes, well, 25 years ago, when I first became a member of the House of Representatives, the population of Sydney, the bulge, had reached Fairfield, which was also in my electorate at that time, and Liverpool. Now it's reaching Campbelltown, which is now in my electorate. And what I'm anxious to see is that governments should not only allow developers to open up blocks of land for housing in those new areas, but that governments should also make it possible for the people who go to live in those areas to have access to every level of education, every quality of health service, and adequate public transport and recreational and cultural facilities. Because the further you go from the GPO in Sydney, of course, the further you are from all those basic facilities. Before the war, everybody in Sydney was in easy reach of the town hall and its concerts, and the cricket ground, and the showground, and the zoo. But now, the average citizen of Sydney, particularly the young people, have to spend more time and more money getting to those spare time activities or those training activities than ever before in the history of the country.
The main reason is because, again, bulge is coming out to the
That's
west,
right.
And so everything else is central.
We've got to get the idea that it is just as essential for a dental hospital or a maternity hospital or a surgical hospital to be in a place like Liverpool or Campbelltown as it is that it should be in Macquarie Street or near the GPO.
The point you brought up was a lot of the facilities are now, as we go further to the west, becoming less and less available to people in the particular areas.
Yeah.
One good example, I think, is, say, the telephone. From Liverpool to Campbelltown, this is considered as a local call, even though it's an STD. Yet you go one exchange out of Liverpool, say to Fairfield, or something like that, it then becomes an STD phone call.
Yes, this is an absurdity, of course, and now that Campbelltown is in my electorate, I'm determined to see that we have a rational geographic arrangement for telephone calls. As you realise, telephone calls are charged for on the distance you are from the GPO. Now, that's not good enough in Sydney, because the GPO in Sydney is only about 5 or 6 kilometres from the Pacific Ocean. The GPO, it's no longer central. The centre of the metropolitan area of Sydney is almost as far west as Parramatta. Now, if we had the telephone system for the Sydney metropolitan area centred on Parramatta, not only would all the people who already have local call rates still continue to enjoy them, but all the people, not only in Campbelltown, but in Penrith and Windsor and so on, would then get the advantage of local call rates, not just to the neighbouring zone, but throughout the metropolitan area. And this is a great burden for people in the Sydney metropolitan area. If you look where the GPO is in Melbourne, or Adelaide, or Perth, or Brisbane, you'll find that in every case it's 20 or even more kilometres from the sea. And there is development north, south, east and west, almost equal distance. But just because telephones started from the GPO, and Sydney, of course, has developed so much more, it can't develop to the east, it has to develop to the north, the south and the west, and particularly the southwest. So it is important to see that we regard the centre of the telephone system as the same as the centre of the metropolitan area. Now, it's purely a technical thing. It is so rational that it must be brought about. And you've just got to get telecom to face up to the geographic realities. People live out here. Why should people have to pay much more for telephones in Sydney than they do if they live no further from the centre of the population in any of the other metropolises in Australia?
And how much of a task would this be to actually change the phone system? Do you say Parramatta is the central phone?
There's no technical reasons why that shouldn't happen. It's only an accounting procedure, and certainly, I suppose, Telecom would not get as much revenue, but it's getting revenue at the moment on false pretences. About 40% of the area where you ordinarily have the benefit of local call rates is over the Pacific Ocean in the case of Sydney.
Yeah, that's right. Yes, it would be. And so, but again, what the original point was that it's becoming a lot more difficult for places just out of Liverpool to contact Campbelltown, which is part of Liverpool.
Well, I'm not going to accede to that proposition because some people in Campbelltown would say Liverpool was part of Campbelltown. The historically fascinating thing is, of course, they were both started by Governor Macquarie.
That's right.
They were both started, I think, in 1810.
Yeah.
And here, a century and 3/4 later, they are suburbs.
Well, they like to be considered as two different suburbs.
Well, they both have their character.
Well, earlier on, you were talking about the hospital and its facilities which are supposedly available, but Liverpool Hospital, as an example, has had all its fundings cut, and there aren't as many facilities now available as there were before, and certainly they won't be able to develop, say, as good as the North Shore. But can you see any possible developments in the future with Liverpool Hospital?
My government made arrangements with the New South Wales government, and in fact with all the state governments, whether they were Liberal, as the New South Wales government was at that time, or whether they were Labor, as the South Australian government was and still is, we made arrangements with all the state governments